Welcome, and thank you for joining me today. Together, we drift into the corridors of history where forgotten voices, hidden stories, and overlooked lives still whisper their truths. As we step back in time, let your imagination open wide, because the past is not just a collection of dusty facts, but a living world waiting to be felt, seen, and understood. Today, we journey into that world, one step at a time. Imagine this: you open your eyes and everything around you feels unfamiliar. The first sensation is the air. It is heavier, tinged with coal smoke that drifts in through a slightly open window, carrying the scent of damp stone and chimney soot. The second is the bed beneath you. Gone are the soft mattresses and duvets you once knew. Instead, you lie on a stiff surface, lumpy with horsehair stuffing, and the sheets are scratchy linen, faintly scented of lye soap. As you stir, the quilt slides off, and its weight tells you it is filled not with synthetic fibers but with feathers. It is the 1880s, and you, bewildered and still groggy, are about to learn what it means to be a Victorian spinster. You sit up and the wallpaper catches your eye. It is patterned with climbing roses in muted tones of green and burgundy, a design fashionable a generation earlier, though now fading with age. The ceiling feels low, the room dim, for daylight struggles to pierce the heavy curtains drawn over narrow windows. A small fire smolders weakly in the grate, filling the chamber with the smell of burned coal and ashes. At first, you imagine this must be some elaborate dream. Yet the details grow sharper, more insistent, and the strangeness of your surroundings refuses to dissolve. Your heart beats faster, for you realize you are not in your own century anymore. You push yourself out of bed, your bare feet touching a threadbare rug. A glance down at your clothes brings the first shock. You are not wearing modern pajamas, but a long, high-necked nightdress made of coarse cotton. Its sleeves billow, its length sweeps almost to the floor, and it feels oddly restrictive. The neckline is fastened with tiny pearl buttons that brush against your throat. You raise your hands to your hair, only to find it braided tightly, pinned clumsily, as though someone had prepared you for bed in an unfamiliar fashion. Your hands themselves look different, paler, thinner, with veins more prominent. For a long moment, you simply stare, the dissonance between who you were yesterday and who you are now filling you with unease. Drawn by a strange compulsion, you move toward the mirror set in a tall wooden wardrobe. Its surface is slightly warped, clouded with the imperfections of old glass. As you lean closer, your reflection shocks you again. The face staring back is your own, and yet not your own. The cheeks are thinner, the hair darker, the eyes ringed with fatigue. The hairstyle, parted severely down the middle, is pinned into a plain coil at the back of the head. There is no powder, no hint of lipstick, nothing to soften the austerity of the image. You look every bit the unmarried Victorian woman you have somehow become, and though your mind races for explanations, none present themselves. The room itself offers little comfort. A wooden washstand sits against the wall, with a porcelain basin and pitcher resting upon it. The water inside the pitcher is cold to the touch, icy from sitting overnight, for there is no tap to summon hot water. A folded towel, rougher than anything you have known, rests beside it. A wardrobe holds a few dresses, all in dark shades, navy, gray, brown, modest garments cut high at the neck and long in the skirt. There is not a hint of bright color or frivolous lace. You sense at once that your life here will not be adorned with luxuries or playful choices. The silence is striking. There is no hum of electricity, no ticking of a digital clock, no muffled sounds of traffic. Instead, the world is hushed, broken only by the occasional clop of horses in the street outside, the rattle of a carriage wheel on cobblestones, or the distant cry of a newsboy hawking papers. You walk to the window and part the heavy curtain, peering out onto a street lined with soot-streaked buildings. The sky is a dull gray, the air thick with the haze of industrial smoke. Men in bowler hats hurry past, women in bonnets clutch baskets on their arms, and children in ragged clothes run barefoot through the grime. It is unmistakably the late Victorian world, alive and bustling, yet burdened with hardship. You step back from the window and the realization hits you fully. You are not a guest here, not a traveler passing through. You are living here. This body, this face, this room, they belong to you now. And more than that, you are unmarried. You are not a fashionable young debutante preparing for her season, nor a newly married wife admired by neighbors. You are something else, something society here has named with quiet disdain, a spinster. The word echoes in your mind, heavy with centuries of connotation. It means you are unmarried past the acceptable age, that people see you as one who has been overlooked or passed by. It means your value is measured not by your own abilities, but by your failure to be chosen. At first, you resist the thought, how could a single word define you? Yet as you look around the room, clues confirm the truth. The dresses in your wardrobe are plain, practical. The furnishings are modest, suggesting neither the wealth of a husband nor the indulgence of a young lady supported by her parents. The books stacked neatly on the small desk speak of solitary hours, volumes of poetry, religious texts, and a few novels. A pair of spectacles lies on top, indicating long evenings spent reading by candlelight. Everything in this space suggests the rhythm of a woman who lives alone, a woman whose life has settled into routine without expectation of change. Your thoughts race back to the life you left behind, where singleness was no crime, where independence was celebrated, where a woman could pursue education, career, love, or solitude without shame. The contrast strikes you with painful force. In this world, your singleness is not neutral. It is a stigma. Already you imagine the whispers of neighbors, the cautious pity of married sisters, the unspoken judgment of strangers. The role you have inherited is not just about who you are, but what society has decided you must represent. As the morning light grows brighter, you try to steady yourself. You move toward the washstand, pouring cold water into the basin and splashing your face. The chill shocks your senses, anchoring you to the reality of this new existence. You take the coarse towel and press it against your skin, the fabric rough but grounding. You glance once more at your reflection, and though the face is not the one you knew, you realize it must now be yours. The door creaks and a knock follows. A voice calls, faintly muffled, "Miss, breakfast is ready." You freeze, startled. The voice belongs to a maid, her accent unmistakably working. Class, her tone respectful but distant. The title, Miss, confirms what you already feared. You are addressed not as a wife, not as a mistress of the household, but as an unmarried woman dependent on the goodwill of family or relatives. You hesitate before answering, your throat tight, then murmur a quiet acknowledgement. Left alone once more, you try to picture the day ahead. Perhaps you will be expected to descend to a family breakfast, to sit among siblings, nieces, or nephews, all married and occupied, while you remain the solitary aunt, the helper, the onlooker. Perhaps you will be drawn into household tasks, or asked to assist with correspondence, or quietly entertain yourself until the day's duties are assigned. Whatever awaits, you sense that your position is precarious. You are here not as the center of attention, but as a shadow, a presence tolerated, perhaps loved in small ways, but never truly celebrated. You sit once more on the edge of the bed, your hands clasped tightly in your lap. The enormity of your situation presses down on you. The world outside is strange, the identity you carry is unfamiliar, and the role imposed upon you is one laden with quiet sorrow. Yet somewhere beneath the unease, a flicker of curiosity stirs. What will this life teach you? What secrets lie hidden within the experience of being a Victorian spinster? Could it be that beneath society's judgment there is a strength, a resilience, even a kind of freedom waiting to be discovered? The questions swirl unanswered as the morning advances, and you know only one thing with certainty. Your life has been utterly transformed, and the journey has only just begun. The word hangs in the air, sharp as a blade, spinster. At first glance, it seems harmless, a simple label, a term that might once have been descriptive of occupation. Centuries earlier, in fact, it had been exactly that. Women who spun thread for a living were called spinsters, and over time, as many of these women remained unmarried, the word drifted from a job title into a social category. By the Victorian age, it had hardened into something else entirely. To be called a spinster was no longer about your skill with wool or flax. It was about your supposed failure to secure a husband, about what society believed you lacked rather than what you possessed. The sound of the word carries judgment. You imagine the hushed tones of relatives whispering at the edge of family gatherings, the way neighbors' eyes might linger as you passed, the pitying smiles offered by younger women who had just entered marriages, the dismissive remarks of men who saw your singleness as evidence of some hidden flaw. To be called a spinster in Victorian England was to be named incomplete. It was as if a shadow followed you everywhere, marking you out as someone who had missed her proper place in the world. By your mid-20s, society would already be watching. Families arranged introductions, dances, and social gatherings to parade eligible daughters before potential husbands. If marriage did not occur quickly, whispers began. Perhaps she was too plain, some might say. Perhaps her dowry was insufficient. Perhaps she had a temperament unsuited to companionship. Whatever the speculation, the label crept closer. By your 30s, it was no longer speculation. It was declaration. You were a spinster, and everyone knew it. The sting lay not only in the word, but in the assumptions beneath it. A Victorian woman's life was framed by marriage. To marry was to secure a home, social standing, financial protection, and the respectability of motherhood. To fail to marry was, in the eyes of many, to waste your youth, to drift into irrelevance. You would not be mistress of your own household. You would not manage servants, direct the raising of children, or stand proudly at your husband's side at church. Instead, you would occupy the margins, living with relatives, caring for aging parents, or working in genteel poverty. Society saw you not as independent, but as surplus, extra, unneeded. Even literature of the time reinforced the stereotype. Novels often cast unmarried women as side characters, lonely governesses, bitter aunts, or eccentric neighbors. Comic sketches in newspapers portrayed spinsters as dry, dup, sharp-tongued, or humorless, their lives reduced to caricature. Young girls absorbed the warning, marry while you can, or risk becoming one of them. The label was not simply description, but prophecy, a sentence of diminished worth that could stretch across an entire lifetime. Imagine sitting in a parlor with relatives, the conversation turning to weddings and engagements. The younger cousins chatter brightly about their suitors, their hopes, their dresses. You smile politely, but when silence falls, all eyes turn toward you. Someone might ask lightly, "And when will it be your turn?" Laughter follows, but beneath the surface lies the unspoken knowledge that your turn may never come. You answer with practiced grace, perhaps a gentle joke, but afterward you feel the weight of that single word pressing harder. Spinster, it explains you before you can explain yourself. The label carried economic consequences as well. In a society where women had limited access to professions, a single woman's financial security was fragile. Without a husband's income, she depended on family inheritance or the charity of relatives. If those failed, she worked, but only in a narrow range of respectable jobs deemed suitable for women. Governess, teacher, seamstress, roles that offered long hours, modest pay, and little social recognition. Even then, employers might see her not as an asset, but as a pitiable figure, working because she had no husband to support her. Yet the cruelty of the label was not only external, it seeped inward, shaping the way women saw themselves. You might awaken each morning with determination, telling yourself you are more than the absence of marriage, that you have talents, thoughts, dreams. But at every turn, society's reflection reminds you otherwise. Invitations skip your name. Family treats you as a convenient helper rather than a guest of honor. You overhear the word whispered, sometimes even spoken directly, "Poor spinster." And in those moments, the word becomes a cage, narrowing your sense of possibility. What made it worse was the way society linked the label with character. If you were unmarried, people assumed it was for a reason. Perhaps you were too proud, too choosy, too awkward. Perhaps your heart had been broken and you carried bitterness. Or perhaps, the cruelest assumption of all, you were simply unwanted. The word suggested deficiency, as though love itself had judged you and found you lacking. Still, there were women who resisted the judgment. Some wore the title with defiance, reshaping its meaning. They devoted themselves to art, writing, social reform, education. They proved that unmarried women could live with purpose and passion. But those were exceptions. For the majority, the word clung stubbornly, never fully shaken off, a reminder that society measured their value against a standard they had not met. Picture yourself walking through a Victorian town. The gas lamps line the streets, the clatter of carriage wheels echoes, and shop windows glitter with goods. You pass groups of women, some with children, some on the arms of husbands. Their status is clear. When people glance at you, they notice your solitary figure, your plain dress, your lack of jewelry that might indicate marriage. They know at once what you are, and the word forms in their minds without being spoken. Spinster, it precedes you into every room, follows you out of every gathering. It is not merely a label. It is a destiny, a boundary, a story written before you can write your own. That is the cruel power of the word in Victorian England. It did not only describe a woman's marital state, it defined her entire existence, and now, having woken into this world, you must carry it, whether you wish to or not. You must feel its weight in every conversation, every glance, every quiet moment, when the silence itself seems to whisper it back to you. Spinster, the word is both prison and challenge, both scar and identity, and you begin to wonder whether you can ever escape its shadow, or whether you must learn to live with it, reshaping its meaning through the choices you have yet to make. Each day begins with ritual, not the kind you once knew, but the steady rhythm of a life shaped by circumstance and expectation. As a Victorian spinster, your morning is a careful negotiation between duty, necessity, and the small pleasures you allow yourself. The air is cold when you rise, for central heating does not exist, and the thin warmth of the dying hearth barely pushes back the chill. You wrap a shawl around your shoulders, slip your feet into slippers that are worn but serviceable, and move toward the washstand. The pitcher holds water icy from the night air, and when you pour it into the porcelain basin, the sound echoes in the stillness of your room. You splash your face, wincing at the shock, but it brings clarity. The towel is rough, leaving your skin tingling, reminding you that comfort in this world is hard-earned. Your clothing is simple, practical, and modest. You select a dark wool dress, its bodice high at the throat, its sleeves long, its skirt heavy enough to drag slightly as you walk. Corset stays press against your ribs, restricting your breath, forcing posture upright whether you wish it or not. The garments are not made for freedom but for propriety. their design reflecting a society that values modesty and restraint over ease. When you lace your boots, the leather creaks, reminding you of how many miles they have already endured. You pin your hair into a neat coil, no ornamentation, no flourish. The mirror confirms what you already feel. You are prepared not to dazzle, but to exist quietly within the boundaries expected of you. If you are of the middle or upper classes, your mornings might be filled with the small duties of a household that is not truly yours. You assist with correspondence, sorting letters, drafting polite replies, managing the trivial but endless demands of social etiquette. You may supervise servants, ensuring meals are prepared, linens are washed, fires are lit. Yet your authority is borrowed, not absolute, for the house belongs to your father if he lives, or to a married brother whose family graciously shelters you. Your role is both helper and dependent, never mistress, never sovereign. You may take tea in a parlor, its furnishings respectable but not luxurious, listening as the household stirs. The married women discuss their children, the men speak of business or politics, and you contribute when asked but rarely command the room. Your presence is useful but not central. You are there to soothe an ailing aunt, to accompany nieces on walks, to be the extra pair of hands and the reliable presence that fills gaps. In this way, your life becomes woven into the fabric of others' lives, always necessary, rarely acknowledged. If your circumstances are different, if you are of the working classes, your mornings are harsher still. You rise earlier, often before dawn, to prepare for employment that demands your time and energy. As a governess, you might eat hastily in a separate room before beginning lessons with your charges, teaching arithmetic, reading, French, and piano to children who both need you and look down upon you, reflecting the attitudes of their parents. A governess is not family, not servant, but somewhere uncomfortably in between. Respectable yet isolated, she carries the loneliness of being neither fully included nor entirely dismissed. As a seamstress, your day is longer still. You bend over fabric for hours, eyes strained in dim light, fingers pricked and aching. The work pays little, the competition fierce, and the exhaustion constant. Yet it is work that keeps you independent, fragile though that independence may be. As a shop clerk, you stand behind a counter, arranging goods, bowing politely to customers who treat you as invisible. Whatever the role, the theme is the same. Respectability clings to your labor, but wealth does not. Through all these variations, the rhythm of a spinster's day carries a muted tone. It is a life often marked by repetition, by tasks that serve others more than yourself. Meals come at set hours, prayers are said at set times, and evenings stretch long with quiet occupations. Needlework, letter writing, reading by candlelight. The work of survival blends with the performance of propriety. You must not appear idle, lest people imagine that your singleness has made you frivolous. Industriousness, modesty, and restraint are your armor. Yet within this daily rhythm lies a strange duality. You are restricted, yes, by social expectations and economic dependence, but you are also, in subtle ways, freer than married women. You are not bound to the demands of a husband's schedule or the endless cycle of childbearing and childcare. You may choose your books, pursue intellectual curiosities, or volunteer in charitable causes that stir your conscience. Many spinsters found solace in these pursuits, carving meaning from the hours society thought wasted. A morning spent visiting the poor, delivering food, or reading scripture aloud to the sick could grant a sense of purpose that no drawing-room chatter could provide. Consider the small details of a day. After breakfast, you walk in the garden, the gravel crunching beneath your boots, the air sharp with coal smoke, but softened by the scent of roses or lilacs in season. The sky is often gray, but sometimes it clears, and you lift your face to the sun, savoring a freedom too subtle for others to notice. You might carry a book in your pocket, a volume of poetry or philosophy, and pause on a bench to read while the world moves around you. To the casual eye, you are simply a solitary woman on a stroll, but to you, these moments of solitude are breaths of life, spaces where the weight of the word spinster lifts, and you are simply yourself. Inside, the day returns to duties. Perhaps you copy recipes, mend worn clothing, or write letters. In every action, you feel the balance between usefulness and invisibility. You are valued for what you do, but overlooked for who you are. In the quiet, you hear the faint ticking of a mantel clock, marking the hours, and you wonder how many more will pass in this same pattern. Evenings arrive with a particular heaviness. Candles are lit, the room glows faintly, and families gather. Married couples sit close, children nestle against their mothers, fathers read aloud from newspapers. You sit at the edge of the circle, included yet peripheral. Your embroidery hoop rests in your lap, the needle glinting in candlelight, each stitch a small defiance against silence. Sometimes you are asked to play the piano, filling the room with music, your skill appreciated, but your presence still secondary. When the house retires for the night, you climb the stairs to your room alone, the echoes of laughter trailing behind you. And yet, in the solitude of your chamber, the quiet becomes your own. You light a single candle, open a book, and let your thoughts roam where they please. You write in a journal, pouring onto the page the ideas and emotions you cannot voice aloud. You savor the ownership of your inner world, knowing it belongs wholly to you. The day may have been filled with service to others, but the night is yours. In those hours, you taste a freedom rare in a world that seeks to define you only by what you lack. Thus, the daily life of a Victorian spinster unfolds, a tapestry of small routines, quiet endurance, and hidden strength. It is neither wholly tragic nor wholly free. It is marked by dependency, but also by resilience, by loneliness, but also by self-possession. Every day demands adaptation. Every moment balances between invisibility and presence. And though society might see only a figure to pity or mock, within the rhythm of such days lies a deeper truth, that life, even constrained, still contains dignity, still holds meaning, and still offers moments of unexpected grace. Every society creates its scapegoats, and in Victorian England, few bore the brunt of ridicule and suspicion more than the unmarried woman. To be a spinster was not simply to exist outside marriage. It was to carry a permanent shadow of disapproval, an aura of deficiency that others projected onto you with little hesitation. Day by day, you would feel it in the stares, the whispers, the jokes offered in poor taste, and the silent assumptions that crept into every interaction. The social stigma wrapped itself around you like a cloak, heavy and impossible to shed, reminding you that, in the eyes of others, your story was one of failure. Imagine walking into a drawing room filled with family and acquaintances. The men gather near the fireplace, debating politics or business, their voices confident and booming. The married women sit with embroidery or knitting, trading anecdotes about their children or the demands of their households. You find yourself seated near the corner, hands folded neatly, offering polite smiles but seldom asked to share your thoughts. When you do speak, the conversation pauses only briefly before moving on, as if your contribution, however intelligent, is less relevant because it comes from you. To them, you are useful as a listener, a helper, a caretaker, but you are not the star of the room. You are the satellite, circling the brighter constellations of wives and mothers. At times, the judgment is less subtle. Satirical newspapers and magazines often depicted spinsters as shrewish, meddling, or humorless. Cartoons showed them with sharp noses, stern expressions, and a clutch of cats, an image that endures even to the present day. Children might snicker behind your back, repeating jokes they overheard from adults. Men might dismiss you with a laugh, assuming your singleness proves you were either too proud to accept suitors or too unappealing to attract them. Each slight might appear small on its own, but together they built a wall of mockery around you, isolating you further. The whispers cut deeper when they came from family. Married sisters might pity you, inviting you to visit, but always reminding you consciously or unconsciously that their lives had moved on into a realm you could not enter. Parents, though perhaps affectionate, might sigh in disappointment that you had not fulfilled the role expected of daughters, to marry advantageously, to bear children, to bring honor through union. Brothers might tolerate your presence but speak of you in lowered voices, a responsibility rather than a pride. Even cousins and neighbors carried the unspoken assumption that your life was somehow incomplete, that you were forever waiting for something that never arrived. What made the stigma especially cruel was its endurance. A young woman in her teens or early 20s might be excused for not yet marrying. She still had time, still had the glow of possibility. But by 25, whispers began. By 30, silence turned to certainty. By 40, you were firmly placed in the category of old maid, a phrase as sharp as it was dismissive. Each year not only marked another birthday, but another tightening of society's judgment. Unlike men who could delay marriage without significant loss of status, women bore the ticking clock of expectation. To resist or fail to marry was seen not as a choice, but as a flaw. Even in public spaces, the stigma followed. At church, pews filled with families, husbands and wives seated together, children squirming at their feet. You alone slipped into a place at the edge, your solitary figure visible to all. The sermon might speak of the sanctity of marriage, of the divine duty of motherhood, and though the words were not addressed to you directly, they rang like accusations. Afterward, parishioners greeted one another warmly, couples exchanging smiles, while you received polite nods, as if your presence required acknowledgement but inspired little else. The very institution that offered solace also reminded you of your outsider status. The loneliness of this stigma was compounded by the culture's obsession with appearances. Gossip traveled quickly, and every detail of your behavior could be scrutinized. If you laughed too loudly, you were ridiculed as desperate for attention. If you withdrew into silence, you were labeled bitter or strange. If you spent time with a male friend, rumors sparked of unrequited affection or impropriety. If you avoided men altogether, people assumed you had given up hope. There was no safe posture, no way to stand that did not invite judgment. Society's gaze was constant, and it sought always to place you in a box you did not choose. Consider, too, the subtle cruelty of language. Married women were referred to as Mrs., men as Mr., titles of respect tied to their social roles. You, however, remained Miss, a title meant for the young, the unformed, the not yet, to be called Miss. In your 40s or 50s was not a courtesy but a reminder. You were suspended, incomplete, fixed in a perpetual waiting room where the door to Mrs. would never open. The title became a label of stagnation, proof that society refused to let you age with dignity. This stigma shaped how people imagined your inner life. They assumed loneliness must consume you, that your days were filled with regret, that you envied every bride and mother you met. They told stories about you without asking your truth. A woman who smiled too brightly at children might be pitied for longing for those she never bore. A woman who pursued intellectual pursuits was often described as burying her disappointment in books. A woman who lived quietly was assumed to be grieving a lost romance, her heart forever broken. No matter what you did, society assigned a narrative. You were the one who missed out, the one left behind. Yet the cruelty of stigma was not simply in the assumptions, but in the isolation it created. Invitations to parties, dances, or gatherings grew fewer as years passed. Families did not always know where to place you at weddings or dinners. Were you to sit with the children, since you had none of your own, with the married couples, where your presence highlighted your difference, or with the elderly, whose company society assumed matched your unfulfilled status? Each placement was awkward, each interaction tinged with discomfort. You belonged everywhere and nowhere, present yet peripheral. At times, the mockery turned inward. Hearing the word spinster enough, you might begin to believe it defined you. Self-doubt crept in during long evenings when the house was quiet, when you set aside your embroidery and stared into the flickering candle flame. Questions rose unbidden. Was I truly unwanted? Did I fail in some unseen way? Should I have settled for the suitors I dismissed? The stigma not only silenced you in public, but threatened to silence your own belief in your worth. It was a battle fought not only against society, but within your own heart. But stigma also carried a paradoxical power. In dismissing you, society revealed its own fragility. The fear of becoming a spinster haunted young women because it symbolized a loss of control, a step outside the script prescribed for them. Your existence became a warning, but also, to some, a possibility. For those who secretly feared or resisted the confines of marriage, your life offered an alternative, however stigmatized, and though the mockery stung, it also set you apart as someone not bound by the same chains. In a quiet, subversive way, stigma became both burden and badge, a sign that you lived outside their rules, even if not entirely by choice. Every glance, every whisper, every caricature painted in the press reinforced the reality that a Victorian spinster lived under the weight of judgment. But behind that judgment lay complexity unseen by those who mocked. While they reduced you to a symbol of failure, you continued to live a life filled with chores, conversations, small joys, and deep thoughts that refused to be confined to their narrow definition. The stigma was real, but it was not the whole story. Still, day after day, you would carry it, like a mark invisible yet unmistakable, a companion as constant as your own shadow. If the burden of stigma was a constant shadow, it was not the only reality for a Victorian spinster. For while society judged, mocked, and pitied, there were also quiet freedoms, unexpected opportunities, and subtle forms of agency that unfolded precisely because marriage had not laid its claim. These freedoms did not erase the pain of being misunderstood, but they opened paths that wives and mothers could rarely tread. To wake up as a Victorian spinster was to carry stigma, yes, but also to discover a realm of choices invisible to those who followed the narrow script of marriage and domesticity. One of the most immediate freedoms was time. Married women were bound by the unending cycle of household management, pregnancies, child-rearing, and the demands of husbands. Their hours were not their own, parceled out to others from dawn until dusk. But as a spinster, your time, though not without duties, was freer to shape. You could read in the mornings, write letters in the afternoons, walk in the garden at leisure. You could pursue hobbies with a seriousness others dismissed as frivolous. Needlework could become an art, music a practiced craft, writing a secret joy. The hours were yours to fill, and though society judged the absence of marriage, it often overlooked the richness you could cultivate in solitude. This autonomy extended beyond time to decisions. Wives were legally bound to their husbands, their property subsumed into the husband's name, their choices filtered through his authority. But you, unmarried, retained a measure of legal independence. Though Victorian laws often limited women's rights broadly, spinsters could own property, run small businesses, and manage inheritances in ways married women could not. Your unmarried state meant that what you inherited from parents or earned through work remained yours, not swallowed by the legal entity of a husband. In an era where the doctrine of coverture erased wives' autonomy, spinsters sometimes wielded more genuine independence than even the most socially respected matrons. Intellect, too, found freer ground in the spinster's life. Without the distractions of domestic obligations, many unmarried women turned their minds toward study, reading, and cultural pursuits. The rise of women's education in the 19th century opened doors to spinsters who hungered for knowledge. You could attend lectures, join reading societies, contribute to journals, or immerse yourself in literature and philosophy. Where married women might have been discouraged from overexerting their minds, unmarried women carved out space to think, to learn, to cultivate their intellectual gifts. Some became teachers, governesses, writers, or reformers, their singleness enabling them to dedicate time and energy to pursuits that stretched beyond the household walls. Indeed, many of the era's reform movements owed their momentum to spinsters. With no children of their own, some devoted their lives to improving the lives of others' children. They fought for education, established schools, advocated for the poor, and nursed the sick. Nursing itself, once considered lowly, was elevated by women like Florence Nightingale, herself unmarried, who harnessed the freedom of singleness to reform medical care. Social activism, philanthropy, and the emerging suffrage movement drew heavily from the energy of women who, unbound by the duties of wifehood, could travel, speak, and organize with a determination that few married women could match. Far from being idle or bitter, many spinsters became the engines of change, their very marginalization giving them the perspective to challenge the status quo. There was also a subtler, more personal freedom, the ability to define yourself outside the expectations of romance. While society mocked, it also left you, in some respects, outside the claustrophobic demands of marital life. You were not compelled to endure a husband's temper, or to bear child after child regardless of your health, or to submit to a union made not of love but of necessity. In a world where many marriages were arrangements rather than romances, some spinsters escaped the burdens of oppressive husbands and endless pregnancies. They bore a different burden, yes, but in its shadow grew the possibility of self-possession. This autonomy was sometimes expressed in the creation of spinster households, women living together, pooling resources, and building lives that defied the assumption of incompleteness. Such households offered companionship, stability, and collaboration. Sisters might live together into old age, or friends might form lifelong bonds. The Victorian ideal of romantic friendship between women often flourished in these contexts, relationships that, while not always understood in modern terms, provided deep emotional intimacy and support. These spinster aunts, or maiden ladies, carved out quiet corners of independence, creating domestic spaces not centered on men, but on mutual care and chosen family. The absence of children of one's own also carried a strange gift, the chance to step into other roles. Spinsters often became beloved aunts, teachers, or mentors, shaping the lives of the younger generation in ways that mothers, overwhelmed with their own children, could not. Freed from daily maternal labor, they could offer wisdom, guidance, and affection in a different form. Many remembered their spinster aunts not with pity but with gratitude, recalling the stories, lessons, and encouragements that expanded their horizons. To be childless was not always to be without legacy, it was to shape legacy in a different key. Yet the opportunities stretched further still into creativity. Literature is filled with women who, unmarried, turned their solitude into art. The Bronte sisters, Jane Austen, George Eliot, all unmarried at various points, channeled the space afforded by singleness into novels that reshaped English literature. Their lives illustrate that the spinster's world, though constrained, could serve as fertile soil for imagination. Freed from certain demands, they listened more closely to the inner world, the stirrings of the soul, the observations of society. Their voices emerged not despite their singleness, but partly because of it. The stereotype of the bitter old maid collapsed in the face of such genius. Travel, too, became possible. While not every spinster could afford it, some used their resources to journey across Europe, to the Middle East, even farther. Their travels, chronicled in diaries and letters, expanded the horizons of a world that sought to confine them. They wrote of ruins and landscapes, of foreign customs and encounters, their independence shocking to those at home, but inspiring to those who read their words. These journeys were acts of defiance and self-assertion, reminders that the unmarried woman could be more than a passive figure in someone else's story. She could be an explorer of worlds inner and outer. Even in small, everyday ways, the spinster's freedom surfaced. You could arrange your household according to your own tastes, without compromise. You could pursue quiet rituals of self-care, crafting routines that nurtured you rather than served others. You could spend an evening reading poetry aloud by candlelight, or tending to your garden, or practicing music without interruption. These moments, easily overlooked by others, became profound affirmations of selfhood. They were the texture of a life lived outside the common mold, rich in its own quiet cadences. There was also a spiritual dimension to spinsterhood. Many unmarried women turned to faith, not as resignation, but as vocation. They became active in church life, teaching Sunday school, organizing charity, visiting the sick, leading prayer circles. For some, their celibacy allowed them to devote themselves wholly to God, echoing older traditions of nuns and mystics. Their singleness, though stigmatized socially, was sometimes reinterpreted spiritually as a calling, a consecrated life lived for service and devotion. This lens reframed the spinster not as incomplete, but as uniquely whole in her dedication. Perhaps most powerful of all was the psychological resilience that spinsterhood fostered. To survive the mockery and pity required strength, creativity, and self-knowledge. Over time, many spinsters cultivated a deep inner life, an independence of thought and spirit that set them apart. They became observant, discerning, less swayed by public opinion because they had long endured its scorn. In a society that prized conformity, their very survival as unmarried women demanded courage. And courage, once forged, could not be easily taken away. Thus, the spinster's life was not simply one of lack. It was one of paradox, stigmatized yet liberated, pitied yet powerful, mocked yet influential. To wake up as a Victorian spinster was to discover yourself in a world that misunderstood you, but also to discover pockets of freedom hidden in its corners. It was to live a life where independence, intellect, creativity, and service could flourish, even in the shadow of stigma. It was to find that your story, though society tried to reduce it to failure, was richer, more complex, and more quietly revolutionary than they ever admitted. The opportunities were not grand in the way marriage was grand, with ceremonies and public acknowledgement. They were quieter, subtler, often overlooked, but they were real and they mattered, and for those who embraced them, spinsterhood became not merely an absence but a presence, not simply a fate endured but a life chosen, or at least transformed into something meaningful. In that transformation lay the hidden triumph of the Victorian spinster, the ability to take the margins and turn them into a canvas, to create a life of substance, even when denied society's approval. Legacy is a curious thing. It is not always forged in monuments or family lines, but sometimes in the quiet lives of those who seemed invisible, those whose presence was overlooked in their own time, but whose influence echoed long afterward. To wake up as a Victorian spinster, you would discover that though society defined you as incomplete, your life would leave traces in unexpected places, ripples carried into the future in ways both subtle and profound. And as we, in the present, look back at that figure, the unmarried woman in her modest dress, living at the margins, we find her less an object of pity and more a mirror that reflects enduring questions about choice, independence, and meaning. The spinster's legacy begins in the families and communities she touched. She may not have married or borne children, but her influence often stretched across generations through her role as aunt, teacher, or caretaker. Countless memoirs from the 19th and early 20th centuries recall the presence of a maiden aunt whose stories, encouragement, or guidance shaped the course of young lives. These women were often the ones who bought books for nieces and nephews, who insisted on education, who instilled moral lessons, or who encouraged curiosity. Their absence of children allowed them to pour their attention into others' children, leaving an imprint that, though unacknowledged in public records, lingered in private memory. A family tree might not bear her descendants, but the character of her relatives often bore her influence. In the realm of social reform, the legacy of spinsters was more visible. Many who dedicated their lives to causes, abolition, education reform, poor relief, health care were unmarried women. Freed from household duties, they devoted themselves to work that reshaped society. Their writings, their schools, their clinics left permanent marks. The suffrage movement in Britain and beyond drew heavily on the energy of spinsters who, unencumbered by family obligations, organized, protested, and published. Their singleness, once mocked, became their strength. It gave them the time, the freedom, and the resilience to fight for rights that future generations of women would inherit. Every ballot cast by a woman today carries, in some small measure, the imprint of those unmarried women who refused to accept silence. The literary legacy is perhaps the most enduring. Jane Austen, who never married, created novels that continue to captivate readers worldwide, shaping how generations understand love, irony, and society. The Bronte sisters, likewise unmarried, wrote with a passion that transformed literature, their heroines challenging norms and exposing the depths of the human psyche. George Eliot, whose life defied conventions, gave us works of extraordinary depth. Each of these women carried the label of spinster, yet their solitude carved the space from which genius emerged. In their work, the supposed lack of marriage became irrelevant. Their legacy was their words, their insight, their art. They remind us that the unmarried woman, far from vanishing into obscurity, could outlive her critics in the most powerful way through the imagination. But beyond famous names, there is the collective legacy of ordinary spinsters. They filled classrooms as governesses and teachers, often nurturing the first sparks of literacy in children who would go on to transform industry, politics, or culture. They ran parish charities, ensuring the hungry were fed and the sick cared for. They copied letters for neighbors, tended to gardens, offered companionship to widows, watched over aging parents. Their lives were woven into the daily fabric of Victorian society. Though they seldom received statues or headlines, their quiet service sustained countless households. The legacy of stability, of continuity, of unheralded labor was theirs, and without it, the society that mocked them might well have faltered. This legacy also carries a paradox. While many spinsters lived lives of invisibility, their existence forced society to reckon with an alternative. The very anxiety Victorians expressed about unmarried women revealed the cracks in their world. If a woman could live without marriage and still build a meaningful life, then marriage was not the sole path to purpose. In this way, the spinster was both a cautionary tale and a subversive symbol. She haunted the collective imagination as the embodiment of failure, but she also haunted it as possibility, the possibility of a woman not defined by a man. That idea, whispered or mocked in the 19th century, resonates powerfully in the 21st, where choice and independence are more openly valued. As we look back, modern parallels emerge with striking clarity. Today, many people, women and men alike, choose not to marry or delay marriage or reject it entirely. They seek fulfillment in careers, friendships, creativity, travel, or service. They face, in some cases, echoes of Victorian stigma, whispers of selfishness, accusations of incompleteness, pity for supposed loneliness. Yet the Victorian spinster's story offers a reminder that such choices are not new. The questions we wrestle with about identity, independence, and the meaning of life without marriage were lived by countless women more than a century ago. Their endurance, their quiet resilience, their ability to carve meaning in the margins illuminate paths for us today. Moreover, the spinster's legacy challenges us to reconsider the very concept of value. In a world that measured women's worth by marriage and children, spinsters insisted, simply by existing, that value could be found elsewhere. Their lives suggest that worth is not bestowed by social recognition, but lived through the choices we make, the love we share, the work we do, and the integrity we maintain. Their invisibility in history books is itself a lesson. Value does not always translate into fame. Sometimes it is written in the lives we touch, the communities we sustain, the courage we embody. To wake up as a Victorian spinster, then, is to step into a paradoxical inheritance. You are dismissed, pitied, mocked. But you are also free, creative, resilient. Your life, while hidden from the grand narratives of history, becomes a thread in the deeper tapestry of human experience. You embody the tension between social expectation and personal reality, between stigma and strength. And in embodying it, you leave a legacy more enduring than you might ever imagine. As you sit in your modest parlor, the fire crackling, your embroidery set aside, you may feel forgotten by the world. But the child you tutored will remember your patience. The young woman you encouraged to read will carry that inspiration into her own future. The book you left annotated will be opened a century later by a scholar tracing forgotten voices. The seeds you planted in the garden will bloom each spring, long after you are gone. Your life, quiet and uncelebrated, will not be erased. It will live on in small legacies, multiplied through the lives you touched. The Victorian spinster is no longer merely a stereotype of failure. She is an emblem of complexity, a reminder that human lives cannot be reduced to single labels. She challenges us to see beyond appearances, to honor the richness hidden in solitude, to recognize the power of those who live outside society's narrow scripts. Her legacy whispers to us across time that independence is not shameful, that resilience is beautiful, that meaning can be made in ways the world does not always applaud. And so, if you were to wake up as a Victorian spinster, you would step into a life fraught with stigma, but also filled with possibility. You would endure whispers and laughter, yes, but you would also discover freedoms, create influence, and leave a legacy that stretched beyond your years. In her story lies not just the tale of a single era, but the timeless truth that lived quietly, courageously, and authentically always matter, even when the world refuses to admit it. And with that, our journey through history comes to a close for today. Thank you for spending this time with me, and I hope these stories stay with you as you drift into the night. Good night, sleep well, and if you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so we can keep exploring the past together. Until next time, rest easy and dream of history.